Hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode of I Cast Fireball, an actual play 5e D&D adventure where we go through the campaign Tyranny of Dragons. Here on this bonus episode of I Cast Fireball, we call this Word of Recall, where we reflect on some of the recent episodes and some of the recent interactions we've had amongst ourselves as players, but also amongst our characters as they grow, develop, and explore new traits that they have. So, as always though, around the table I'm joined by...
Mickey, who plays Malamara.
Jacob, who plays Lancethane.
And Ned, who plays Fleeple.
Or Apel, if you've listened to the most recent episode, but we'll get to that. I'm jumping ahead there.
Hey.
Everybody, we just got through a massive arc of us infiltrating, going into, and exploring the caves of the Cult of the Dragon.
Yeah.
That was, not only did you... That was this part 2 of the Cult of the Dragon, so to speak, where you had to go back, but this was your first big decision to go back without trying to rescue people. I mean, the initial motivation was to go save Ardina's father, was to go help these prisoners, but this time it was strictly a reconnaissance mission. It was strictly to find out what was going on here. So we know the big motivation with Fleeple was to get rid of, to see to it that all the spawn of Tiamat or all Tiathar are dealt with. And this cult, there's no question that there's some intense evil in this cult here. And I don't know if we've answered this question entirely yet, but what was everybody's motivation to go back to these caves to find this evidence that Leosin had charged you all to do?
Caldera Part 2, this time it's personal. I would say... for Lance hit a point, because he went with them specifically because the first time, because of Ardina and her father, and there was a promise made, and he's like, I don't want to break promises, especially to a kid, but then the second time he started to realize, I think through that whole series of events in the camp, that these people, their one life before I met these two others was pretty terrible. The only other companionship I had was a bodyguard who shall not be named.
Does he even have a name at this point?
Because you can't remember his name?
Because I can't remember. Yeah,
Did he even exist?
Was he even a thing? Maybe he's going to... I don't know. And so Lance kind of realized... life before, where I was trying to stick it alone and just hire somebody to possibly travel with or protect me, did not work out very well. This, even though it's crazy and chaotic and everything that my intuition says this is the wrong way to do it, it's actually been the better way, even though it would have never made sense to Lance. So he kind of, at the invitation to go back, he realized my life is the way I wanted it to be with these people. And so even though I think that this is going to maybe screw me in the end, it's better than what I had before, and he's actually starting to like these people. He's starting to like Fleeple. He's starting to respect Mal.
An important distinction.
Us knowing that Mal and Lance have that brother-sister relationship going on.
He's starting to appreciate both of these people's characteristics and realizing that they're actually making me do things that even though I think are risky, they're actually feeling worthwhile. And so that's for Lance why he decided to go back.
That's interesting how you put it. You said your initial intention of having that bodyguard, you wanted to live a certain way and you wanted to have a certain life, and you felt you could achieve that almost being solitary with this one bodyguard, but instead you are finding that Lance's life and his goals are being achieved, crazy enough, with these chaotic people, with these people who have a purpose and who have a drive.
And I would even say maybe not his initial purposes or his initial plans. He was very much a lay low kind of person. He still is, but he was very much a lay low kind of person. Don't attract the crowd. And even though he might have been somewhat succeeding in that, besides the bodyguard co-op ruining everything, he realized after a time traveling with Fleeple and Malamara that, oh, I'm feeling fulfilled and actually like feeling like I'm accomplishing things. And even though the way I was living before I think is the safest way, it's not. There was no purpose. There was no fulfillment. And so he's starting to, and he will still continue to have this kind of pull on him of, you need to be safe, but I want to feel like I'm doing something worth something.
Awesome. And I think that's definitely been showing too with how Lance has been interacting with Fleeple and caring for everybody here. And Mal, would you say that's a similar thought process or feelings that Mal has going along with Fleeple, or going back to the Caldera 2, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that idea of being a part of something and a part of a pack. I think right now they're still kind of in their early stages of learning to trust each other and learning to work together. That she's just kind of hitched her wagon to Fleeple and just going along for the ride. Fleeple got a thing from Listen and he's like, we're going back. And I'm like, cool, let's go.
Fleeple's the glue.
Well, it makes more sense too with Mal, you sharing you being from the spine of the world, you sharing a little bit, being from a tribe as well. And this being like, this community and this sort of like camaraderie being something that it seems Mal is attaching to herself to as well.
Very much so.
One thing that I'm kind of wondering now with all of this is this idea of Fleeple being kind of the driving force behind a lot of what happened here. Fleeple's faith is a huge part of that, and it's taken him on a lot of ups and downs, and his faith itself has gone on a lot of ups and downs as well. From like some very heavy zealotry right at the very beginning to some pretty heavy doubt. And I'm interested to hear maybe what Mal and Lance feel about this sort of faith journey that Fleeple's going on and how this is directing so much of their journey here.
Interesting.
Yeah, and maybe to add to that question is, since I feel like it's kind of related, like, how do they feel about faith? Or how do they feel about either Fleeple's faith journey itself, or what feelings is it bringing up in them regarding their own faith?
Well, I'm sure Jake's answer will be longer than mine, so, because we've had some really cool interactions with
What does
Lance.
that mean?
Well, we had a lot of cool interactions with Lance Phelan.
I know. I'm just
Fleeple's
totally teasing.
faith
That's true.
interactions, whereas I feel like Malamar hasn't been a part of those conversations as much. And so at this point, that's just taken, as a player, has taken a backseat. And I like that it's kind of playing out between Lance Leyland and Fleeple, and that they kind of get a spotlight, or like their characters are connecting over that point.
Do you feel that Mal has a lot to contribute regarding this faith crisis or this journey of faith?
I don't. Currently, where I have her written to, I don't think so. I can see there are avenues that I could pursue with that, with things from her past and her backstory that might be interesting. But where she's at right now, I don't think that she didn't really have it growing up, and it's just not on the forefront. It's just kind of, I guess that's Fleeple's thing. But if Lance Thalen obviously starting to kind of get into it and starting to question it, that could also be a point that brings up with Malamar as well.
Interesting. Jacob, any thoughts?
Nope. No, I'm just joking. Of course, I have so many thoughts. I think it's, something to tie off back actually to Malamar before we get to anything of Lance. I think it might be interesting in the future. Just as a player, I've been always intrigued to see a moment that we haven't seen pop up yet of Malamara with her patron and that relationship in contrast or in juxtaposition to Fleeple. And even though he's not a cleric, he is a druid, but he is still a follower of Bahamut.
Right, and Jacob, if I could interrupt, sorry, just building on that, I forgot to mention before we got to the camp, Malamara having this intense conversation with her patron, or somebody disguised possibly as her patron. You changing your Eldritch invocations there, Mickey, as Malamara. It's interesting that you say there's not much to her faith journey or when it comes to like a higher power, and her being a warlock and having this relationship with a patron. It's just interesting where that's coming from. And I guess what were your thoughts regarding, or what was Mal's thoughts? Because I know that you had talked to me about leveling up in Barbarian, doing a multi-class situation. I guess this is a little bit behind the screen here, but when Mickey was multi-classing into Barbarian, she initially had the Eldritch Invocation to get the Mage Armor, but when you're Barbarian, you have unarmored defense. You don't need Mage Armor anymore necessarily. So we understand from this perspective why we wanted to change Eldritch Invocations, which I think was totally fine. But how do you feel like Mal approached that interaction? And had she had many interactions with her patron before now?
No, which is kind of not to spoil anything in the future of. That's what I mean. I think that there might be some progression that would be interesting. What Jake was just talking about with that juxtaposition between like a deity relationship and a literal demon fiend relationship. I think might be very could lead to some interesting RP and character growth or arc in the future.
I see. I agree. Okay. So maybe more to come there. Okay, great. Sorry, Jacob, I interrupted you there.
No, it's all good. But yeah, I think that'd be an interesting juxtaposition to see how that happens in the future with Malamara and her relationship versus Fleeple and his relationship to a being they follow, worship, or just, adhere to. For Lance Thalen, Lance Thalen is, well, I mean, again, hashtag spoilers. It's not really a spoiler, but he's chaotic neutral. That's his alignment. And so he doesn't really trust any system. Obviously, that's another thing, too, that if you haven't caught on by now, Lance Thalen doesn't trust a lot of things. And and the thing about faith is it's supposed to be complete trust in a system or a person or a religion of faith. And so
do you feel like with this in mind, Lance Thalen having such strong feelings against this, was there a particular instance you'd be willing to tease out of maybe an instance where he developed this belief or this idea? Like maybe he did trust somebody?
Yes.
Or would you be willing to share that?
Lance, and he's hinted at it in the past. I think there was a moment where he was talking to one of the party and he talked about like trusting in something that ended up hurting him in the end and putting his faith in the wrong things. And so, yes, there is instances of his past where he has trusted in a person or a system that really, really hurt him. And that's where he comes from. And that's where a lot of his backstory will further be explored is this betrayal that he feels. Now, with that said, though, it's not like he's against what Fleeple's doing. He's chaotic neutral. It's very much like a live and let live situation kind of thing. Like as long as your faith in your system is not imposing upon another person's wanting to live, wanting to be them, follow their own path, then he's fine with it. The thing I think that pops up, is it in the cave? I think it's in the cave where he talks to Fleeple. I forgot the exact instance where he talks to Fleeple about it, but he talks to Fleeple about how he's seen systems that have been purported to be good end up doing terrible things, but they're good, so they're excused for it. And he thinks that's very hypocritical, whereas bad systems like, are just prescribed as bad and they're just pushed to the side. And it is in the cave, because we talk about the dragons and their metallicness. And he says, well, all dragons, no matter what color they are, because the metallic dragons are always the evil dragons, which is very true. It's very connected to D&D lore. But he said, well, all dragons, though, have an element of pride to them. So is there really such a distinctness to them? And again, this is in Lance Thalen's mind, because he doesn't have a lot of experience with dragons either. Like, is there such a distinct difference between these chromatic versus metallic dragons. Or is it chromatic? Sorry, which one's the bad one?
It's chromatic. I was gonna.
Metallic's the good one. Metallic's the good one. Chromatic's the bad one. But he, in Lance Thalen's mind, he's like, well, they're all doing things based on pride and based on, well, I'm right and this is the right system. And so he's distrustful of the whole thing. Like Bahamut, for instance, he's like, he must be a good guy because Fleeple seems like a really good guy. But I don't know if it's just all purity and good intent. There might be, especially maybe not even in the deity themselves, but in the followers, sometimes the followers can get a little sidetracked or zealous. And I think that's where Lance specifically pointed out to Fleeple, like, becoming a zealot and just fully invested in the faith and trying to destroy everything that's against it might lead you down the path you are trying to destroy even. So he doesn't say it in those words, but that's kind of what Lance's thought was. And I don't know, in that conversation, I don't know if Ned recalls, I just think it'd be interesting to see from Ned's perspective, because Ned, you said Fleeple has kind of gone through some challenges of faith, I assume, in encountering some of these things in conversations. Mm-hmm. How has Fleeple kind of evolved in faith?
Yeah, so Fleeple, the way that I've portrayed him is kind of a function of the fact that his alignment is true neutral. And I really enjoy playing characters that are true neutral because it's a very interesting alignment to try and figure out how to make it work. And in Fleeple's case, I think it manifests in a lot of unsurety and a lot of inexperience and some naivete. Mm-hmm. That he has these, like, he went through his entire life living to be a greedy spawn of the Dragon Queen, suddenly has this massive moment that kind of validates the fact that he didn't like that, and so he goes whole hog in this direction, and he went from essentially a black place to a white place, and now is suddenly realizing, hey, the world is a gray place, and that's interesting to try and navigate. And so I think there's kind of a lot of vacillation in the way that I've been characterizing Fleeple. He goes from one extreme to the other, and it's kind of like, you know, there's those springs that you put on the floorboard to, like, stop the door as it's opening, and when you flick one of those, it vibrates back and forth, and then slowly it comes to the center. And I think that's kind of the journey that Fleeple's going on.
Yeah, I not only do I like that analogy, but I mean, we've seen Fleeple go back and forth so drastically, you know, and him sharing a little bit about his backstory. I mean, pretty severely taking a hard 180 from what he was raised and what he was born with. So it would make sense to me why there would be a little bit of a now that you're in the proving grounds area, so to speak, you're actually being presented with challenges, and you're on a holy quest, or you're on a mission of your choosing, or you feel drawn to this mission, sort of finding that true neutral balance as you described, Ned. It's interesting, yeah.
And I think eventually he might move more in the direction of neutral good rather than true neutral. In the very beginning, he was kind of like, harm indiscriminately. These guys are kobolds, they're bad, I will kill them without any remorse. But eventually, like, the experiences he's had with his friends, experiences that he will have in the future, interacting with his faith in a more stable environment, I think is going to move him towards more of a general sense of magnanimity and kindness with the world around him, and generally wanting to kind of put kindness first rather than zealotry first.
Amazing. Well, let's sort of jump ahead a little bit in our journey into the cave. We had a couple interactions near the entrance of the cave. One of the biggest ones, first off, the cleverest ones that I didn't see coming as the Dungeon Master, is having a Find Familiar try to map the entire cave complex for you.
For a whole episode.
So well done there, Mickey. Well done. It's the simplest things that flabbergast the Dungeon Master, and that was one of them for me. So, but in that, finding out that Mondath was not only in the cave, but smack dab right in the entrance, just behind 12 to 14 guards at the time.
Imagine if we just, like, stumbled into that room. We hadn't snuck ahead. We're just like...
There was some conversation about immediately just like jumping right in there. I mean, how close, how on the fence were each of you to just being like, this is it, we're just going to run in there right now without exploring the rest of the caverns?
For me, not a lot. I wanted to explore the whole thing. I think we talked about this even previously. There's been social media posts. Me and Ned are completionists. We want to explore the whole thing. We want to get it. We want to find out all the little bits and treasures. But my only hesitancy, I think, was thinking: is Thomas doing a time mechanism where if we are exploring too much, things will get away? But as soon as Mickey's like, "Oh, I'll just perch my familiar here," I was like, "Sweet, let's go. Let's explore." But that was my only.
Are they going to leave?
That was my only hesitancy. Is if Thomas is somehow doing a time mechanism where if we waste too much time in this cavern, we will miss our opportunity. That was my only hesitancy.
And I will say that a clever clever dungeon mastering tip is to make things continuously like move and have action outside of the party. The biggest one being, honestly, the treasure trove. It just being gone. You had gone back to Greenest for a time, and as a result of that, the treasure trove was gone at that point. Their actions were still moving forward while you were taking your own actions as players. As fortunate that was, and so I mean that's. I would say it's
still hurts.
So I think that's on par. I think I too, as a player, love to make sure I'm exploring everything to find all those. I played too many video games to know that the magic items are exactly where you don't expect them to be, like the trash pile, which just so happened to not have any magic items in there, from what you all know.
I'm still distrustful of that. I rolled a natural 20, and I still am not certain that there wasn't something in that pile.
I detect magic.
You know what the treasure was?
And I still don't believe
you know what the treasure was? It was a compost room. So the treasure was recycling.
The treasure was the circle of life.
The treasure was the friends we made along the way.
In the trash.
The dragon eggs we found along the way. Mm-hmm. Which, the stuff that you did find inside the cave, I mean, you found the biggest item was finding these dragon eggs, but I mean, you found a lot more than what you had initially signed up for, or what you had had maybe thought was there. You had the cave with the bats, you had the weird meat locker room, and all of the drakes being trained. And then the most despicable character, Tommy Wingzo, that you had captured and brought along with you.
Good old Tommy, still rotting in a jail cell somewhere.
Such a great choice of voice, Thomas.
Which I have for any aspiring dungeon masters out there, for anybody who is thinking about making a drastic choice for any character,
don't
be ready to commit. For at least twice to 3 times the length that you had initially thought it would last. I thought Tommy Wingzo would be a one-and-done episode, and here he is, still alive.
Nope. Do you know
up to this point?
Do you know why we tied him up, Thomas? It wasn't because we actually needed him. We wanted that voice.
It's just to torture me.
Follow us.
You wanted to torture me. You wanted me. Yeah. Yeah, never underestimate your players or their cruelness, everybody out there. But yeah, there was quite a bit to explore in those caves, and we had some pretty intense moments there. Probably one of the first intense moment was Fleeple going unconscious for the second time in the campaign, attacking Tommy Wingzo, and then going down those stairs to discover the entire room of kobolds and kobold going down as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, being the one who went unconscious, I don't know, I enjoy playing lots of different characters. So here's part of the problem, though, is like, I would not be torn up necessarily if Fleeple were to die in one of these episodes. But
you shut your mouth,
see,
Ned.
Here's the thing. I have a tendency of creating characters that other people would be very upset if they died. but I've got a bard waiting
I was gonna
in
say,
the
he just really
wings
wants
to
to be that
step in if
bard.
anything bad happens.
Don't you be advertising your bard. I got one there too.
So I don't know. I wasn't necessarily super freaked out. It would have been interesting to try and introduce a new character in the midst of that dungeon. But, I mean, Mickey and Jake were the ones who had to actually do all the heavy lifting during that situation.
And Mickey, I mean, both of you did. Lance getting Fleeple out of there, and then Mickey, I mean, I thank heavens for Ned knowing so many more rules than I do, and optional rules that make sense. But it just makes sense for a massive barbarian swinging this great sword to be able to cleave through these enemies if they're all the same type and they all have similar health. And Mickey, how did that feel as a player to be able to do so much damage with a melee character? I know previously you've shared that you were a spellcaster in a previous campaign, but this being a melee player and still being able to take care of, instead of just one enemy, one turn, being able to take care of multiple enemies, are you able to find different ways that Mal can contribute to the party, or that things that you hadn't considered Mal could do before?
It's one of those weird things about D&D that it's all imaginary, but rolling that many dice, I'm not actually swinging a sword through and killing all of these creatures, because honestly, that would be horrific for me as a human being to do. But like, there's
Break
something
the fourth wall down.
Like, I don't know, primal. I don't know, like that's like. I swing my sword and I kill all these things, and just like decimating that room full of people. And for some reason, we keep doing Mal taking on like 9, 10, 11 people, and then Fleeple and Lance having one person that they're dealing with. Which, to be fair, Mondath was a massive thing to like try and do. But there's such a comedic, I don't know, I think it's like a comedic situation that we keep finding ourselves in, of them trying to take care of one person and Mal just like slaughtering these people, which I have found very funny.
I will say, fast forwarding to our latest episode, Fleeple did try and stay in a room with you, and you decimated everybody. So Fleeple just roly-poly the heck out of there, being like, "That's got this. Dip's got this." We tried to change it.
Thematically, it's perfect. I wouldn't change a thing.
I wouldn't either.
I think so.
I thought it was so great.
And Fleeple's true neutral nature makes so much sense why he just saw Mal go into rage and be like, nope. And then just roll backwards into the room with Lance and Mondath. Yeah, I mean, Mal did that twice in this cave, and showing her true colors. We'll get to her when she gets into a rage for the first time in a little bit here. But speaking of barbarians, we came across Lana and An, where we had it was an encounter which started as a combat encounter, but then switched into somewhat of this social encounter with Mal being announced as the Dragon Slayer, right? And all of you taking part into that, they just recognizing Mal in particular. I think all of you did a pretty good job in the episodes describing how your characters felt, but Lance, you seem to have the most difficult time with these barbarians and with their reasoning, right?
It was just because I rolled super high, and I was like, what the crap? I rolled No, I'm joking. Yeah. It was very much like if something, again, Lance Thalen, he doesn't trust well, but he also, he tries to go with logic as much as possible and not emotional based, or just like, oh, it's our honor bound duty, which the barbarians were kind of saying as their excuse, like, we made this promise and it was just, how am I phrasing this? It didn't make sense to Lance that they made a promise to Mondath, and we're going to break the promise to stop defending what Mondath asked them to, but then to somehow say that, oh, but us attacking Mondath is over the line, even though we've already broken the promise. And it was like, you're doing this purely on a somehow honor-based system that you've already broken. So why are you being a hypocrite? And again, like we pointed out, Lance is hypocritical himself, but it is something that I think is a big character flaw of his, but he also resents it when he sees it in other people. Maybe it's because he resents himself having it.
Ooh, that's deep.
Yeah, it's deep. It was intentional the whole time. I was like, there's hypocriticalness going here, and I'm at no. But it's fun how the story. It's fun how the story plays out that way, because that's what Lance was thinking during that moment. This is hypocritical, and you're not doing the logical thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I stepped in to assist Lance with the argument, but the whole time I couldn't stop myself from thinking, Thomas bounced an encounter for 3 players to fight against 12 angry cultists and a woman who was going to turn into a dragon. He can't just let us take 2 barbarians in with us and mess up his balance.
He could have sprinkled some people we didn't notice. Some hiders.
Oh, these 5 people were under a rug that you didn't know about.
Layer action. What? Well, it's a layer?
A layer action, people just pop up.
That's an interesting point, because I did actually, for this, to give you a little bit of context, I thought that encounter was over your current skill level. It would be a very difficult conflict. It would be very difficult battle with Mondath and the 12 cultists.
So why didn't you level us up?
And so,
why didn't you?
Maybe I'm just cruel.
Oh, it's always a DM. That's a DM trait you have to have.
And so there was a possibility of the barbarians actually joining your side to battle. It would have required a couple of not only the persuasion roll that both of you helped out with, but it was actually mainly geared towards Malamara, since they had this devoted feature to Langdorosa previously, and now that devotion, without any of you realizing it, without them telling you, immediately went to Mal. If there had been some strong or persuasive arguments from Mal specifically, and to kind of describe, or even an order, an intimidation, to try and get them to do it even against their will, there would have been a strong possibility that they would have joined your side. But that leads me to my next question. Mickey, Mal being very honor bound and recognizing their own agency and stuff, do you feel that knowing that how powerful Mondath was, and would you have changed how intent you were to try and get them to help you in that final battle or follow along with you?
I think from Mal's perspective, the reason I kind of just let it go was that uncomfortableness of being revered, of all of a sudden not knowing what to do with that, kind of flustered her. And then I really liked that Lance was having those kind of emotion, that what's the word? Just
turmoil?
Yeah, sure. That internal turmoil. And so just kind of letting him have that moment to have that internal turmoil. But I think that's why I didn't pursue it or try and get, really try and get the barbarians to come, was because she was just so, awkward of, all of a sudden, so much of her life has been, she was always the odd one out. She was always feared, hated, whatever, all negative things having to do with her race and what we would say her class growing up. And then to have all of a sudden somebody be revere her, you are the Dragon Slayer, was very weird for her. And so I just took that more as overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do with it. And so then when Lance and Fleeple were like, you guys should come. And she's like, yeah. And it didn't work. It was just darn. She didn't know what to do with it. I love the way the Mondath battle turned out. Now I know I should probably push a little harder. Maybe that would make the difference.
Well, I thought that brought an interesting aspect for Malamar that I, as the Dungeon Master, wasn't aware of as well. Her timidity in leadership, or her timidity regarding accolades and honor being thrust upon her. That was a left turn for me as the dungeon master, which I found very intriguing. So I thought that whole social encounter was very satisfying for me to kind of see how every single one of you played out. And there's always a little bit of, well, yes, I built an encounter a certain way, and if you bring too many allies, but there's always the possibility to bring allies, and it's just interesting to see how each of you finally are, each of your characters are finally starting to like come into their own or discover these insecurities they have. So yeah, it was just a very fun moment for me. To kind of take a seat back and take a look at all of that. To build on our characters coming into their own, Fleeple, you were given the charge to carry these 3 black dragon eggs. You described in the episode how vast Fleeple is discovering this network is of the Cult of the Dragon is becoming. What are some of the things that Fleeple's thinking right now? What are some of the... describe to us kind of what Fleeple is going through right now, having made this discovery and starting to connect these dots.
Yeah, Fleeple's experience is not too dissimilar from, I guess, any person's experience as they start delving into the lore of dragons in D&D, where it starts out and it's like, oh yeah, these are the cool big lizards that we fight at the end of the campaign, and it makes for a really cinematic climax to this journey that our characters are going on. But especially
which is true.
If you start reading into Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, for example, that just came out recently, you start realizing, oh wait, dragons are like the reason the world exists. There's a lot of depth, and these creatures are so intrinsically connected with the world and the magic that it is imbued with. And Fleeple obviously doesn't know a lot of this stuff about dragons and their connection with all of this grand cosmic stuff, but when you're faced with something that is so much bigger than you, it's hard not to be kind of reverential to that in a way. And so I was kind of surprised myself listening back to it, the way that Fleeple treated this, almost like Frodo taking the ring, this burden of carrying these dragon eggs, where it's like, yeah, these things are evil. And at the very beginning of the campaign, Fleeple might have just looked at those and been like, okay, time to smash these eggs. But there is a sense of, like, this is much bigger than myself, and I can't just go in mucking stuff up and acting on my own whims when there's bigger things at stake.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody interested in the lore of the dragons, we'll get into a lot of it, obviously, in this campaign of Tyranny of Dragons. But if you don't want spoilers into aspects of this campaign, the Fizban's Treasury of Dragons is an excellent resource for you to get your fix on chromatic, metallic, and
gem dragons.
Gem dragons as well. So.
Maybe Lance would be into those. They're neutral.
There you go.
It's just him and a bunch of gem dragons talking about the what ifs of the world. Yeah, well, what if you considered this way?
Go and leave a comment on our podcast if you want to see a bonus episode with just Lance and a bunch of gem dragons talking about what ifs.
Wearing dinner robes and drinking wine, talking about what ifs. Oh boy, that's so boring. That'd be so boring.
Well, moving past this fireside chat, we brought us to the main conflict with Mondath, with Tommy Wingzo still tied up behind you guys.
Oh, wait, I have a quick question. question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jacob.
How many times were you in our sneak rolls just like, dang it, because we never rolled to initiate those Sturges?
Oh my gosh.
How surprising was that for a DM?
Seriously.
Casual.
I was like, okay, well, point of order, I was re-listening some of the episodes. So they were bats, but underneath the bats, there were Sturges mixed in amongst the bats as well. So when I said it was bats, it was truly bats, but they're because you guys had stealth so many times, I didn't want you to be like, Thomas just threw a bunch of sturges in there just cuz, which is why I had Tommy Wingso be like, aha, the sturges have not gotten you. Oh my goodness.
That accent. We need to find Tommy Wingso again. Bring him back somehow in this campaign.
I need to like trap him in a soul gem.
Well, it's every winged kobold. That is true. Every winged kobold has that voice.
It could be a regional thing, though. You don't know.
I can't wait to find out other region accents for that.
I'm Tracy Jordan.
Tracy Jordan.
Gosh. Oh, the future.
That's actually really great, Tracy Jordan.
The future is bright for winged kobolds.
Oh, yeah. But I didn't want you all to feel like you got the rug swept out underneath you, especially after going through that room so many times. And if like the last time you failed your stealth roll and then all of a bunch of sturges come out of nowhere, you're like, what the crap?
Where'd these come from?
But yeah, after the fourth time, I was like, okay, well, they deserve to know. It's kind of crazy at this point. But yeah, leaving Tommy Wingso behind, you all decided to enact your plan to go into Mondath's lair, which with Zaza, this is my second warning of the night, which is the same warning as the first one. When you make a on-the-spot decision for a voice, be ready to commit to it for 5 times as longer than what you initially thought. I didn't expect Zaza to say an imp, but here we are, using the same voice for just the rest of the campaign. Zaza's going to go through puberty, and their voice is going to change. But using Zaza as this clever distraction to then book it into it. Like, how many that's a bold plan to just run in there and be like, all right, I'm going to run by all of these guys and try and go straight for Mondath. Which I didn't see coming as the Dungeon Master. What were each of your thoughts? Like, you all committed to this, obviously, but when it came to like the amount of success that you would have with this plan, where were you all on a scale of like 1 to 10? Like, did you feel like that was the best plan, or was it the best plan you could come up with, or like what complications could you foresee occurring from that?
Man, I was just like, they're actually going with this? This is, we're gonna do this?
Okay.
I had a very similar feeling, yeah.
I thought it was the best plan that we had. Like, it's either because it was the death funnel. That was the idea, at least. It did not turn out that way, because who knew the death funnel would be
turned into the death
the friends we made along the way.
Exactly.
But it was a good plan. Like, okay, it's a way to limit how many can interact with us and to pick them off if that's the way it goes down. Otherwise, we're fighting in this huge room with all these cultists, and then Mondath could do any number of things in the other room once they start hearing all the commotion. So I thought it was a great plan. It was just, can Lance get there in time? Mm-hmm. And then can we get either Malamara or Fleeple to get into that, to plug the hole, to start the funnel process. That was the only worry, is somehow we would roll terrible in initiative, or somehow it just wouldn't work. But it did work in a very different way, though.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I actually, when you presented that plan right at the beginning of the entrance to the cave in like the first episode, you're like, what if we just do this? Mid-session, I thought to myself, my gosh, that could work.
What if they do that?
That could totally work. Like,
they broke the game.
Oh my goodness. Just my doing all the math calculations in my mind, and just being like, oh my goodness, that could actually work if they just book it into there, get to Mondath, and just lay waste to these people, which it's eventually how it ended up, and it was so great. And I just want to call out Jacob. Thank you for being so willing to roll with my dungeon mastering rulings in the moment when it goes completely against what you had initially thought your character could do and thought what your plan was.
Oh, the sneak attack stuff. Yeah, I think if I had anything to do over, I think it would be, I would run in and I would have stopped right before the entrance of Mondath Cavern and try and like whip around and shoot. But it just didn't play out that way, and you know what? I'm still kicking it, barely, but I'm still kicking it.
2 health points.
You got to roll with the punches. I think I was more just like wanting to know like what the mechanics were of it, so I could like know in the future what to plan on. It was less of me being like, Thomas, stop me, and it was more like, oh, I didn't know the mechanics of this. I got to learn those more.
Right. Which is one big reason that I'm glad we're all playing a pretty new class to each of us. I feel like every single one of us has a new class that we approached in this campaign, and it's allowing us and you listeners, I hope you're able to see and come along this journey with us as we are discovering these new mechanics, as Ned is gleaning this information he gets from all these books for optional rules that just make sense as we throw them in there and make it more satisfying with a 3-player party, because 3 players is traditionally one less than what you have in a normal, typically D&D party. So it helps, I think, even things out, but ultimately just have us more fun as well, as Malamara was able to literally cleave through the entire room with her new rage damage. Now, Fleeple, you were the one to see Malamara in her transformation as she first enacted her rage. First off, did the arms of Hadar destroyed 6 people with your help, doing the thunder wave, but then her going into a rage. What was your thought seeing her go through this like physical transformation, and then we'll go to Mal as well, actually having gone through this physical transformation?
Yeah, I believe I mentioned in one of our previous Recall episodes the sort of general direction of Fleeple's feelings towards Lance and towards Mal, and with Mal sort of starting to realize there's stuff going on here that we're probably going to have to deal with eventually. But Fleeple just, on the whole, is pretty non-confrontational with the people that he cares about, and he has his own journey. He is not immune from having baggage in the past, even though he's already shared all of it with his friends. But yeah, it's the kind of thing where he's like, we're going to have to talk about this eventually, but there are bigger fish to fry right now. I'm going to focus on killing this dragon lady that's killing my friend, and I'll let Mal focus on killing everybody else.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up, with everything you've talked about, Fleeple coming back from his own journey, being part of this evil that he's now trying to not become anymore, being able to see Mal go down this seemingly evil or just vicious path. Yeah, we'll have to see where this plays out, but Mal finally going, and Mickey as well, finally going into a rage. Let's talk Mickey first. Did you expect that sort of transformation to occur with Mal as you went to a rage? Because traditionally, rage doesn't necessarily change your appearance and change your person, but in this case, it did. Like, was that surprising to you as a player?
One of my favorite things about playing with you, Thomas, is that you're so good at taking the feedback that we have as players, or like the ideas that we have as players, and then putting them into the game in unexpected ways. So once I had decided to multi-class, Thomas, you and I had a discussion about what that was going to mean for Malamara. And one of the things that I had initially kind of talked about was, well, what if there is a kind of a difference between Mal when she's raging and Mal when she's not, especially because I wanted to explore more of this idea of Mal believing that she is human and kind of pushing off that half orc or the orc side of her, and that conflict that creates when you're trying to deny like part of you. And so we're like, well, what if we use rage to kind of show that difference, that rage is much more orc-like, whereas her normal self is trying to be human. And so that was like, we talked about it at length and we had some ideas. And so I was like, yeah, I feel really interesting about that. And then to hear you like describe it is such a different experience, to be like, oh, that was like, both what I thought was going to happen and totally different than what I thought was going to happen. And it's so exciting to like hear your character like come to life through the voice of a dungeon master, or your ideas come to life through a dungeon master in ways that you hadn't expected. And so I was very happy with it. I really liked the physical transformation, and I am excited to explore more of that as we continue on in the campaign, because the rage will become very central to Malamar's character arc.
Right, and Mickey's very kind, but she came up with most of that during those conversations that we had. So if anything, I was just regurgitating what Mickey had told me previously. So her own imagination is what fostered these amazing moments off screen here, which I find the most satisfying, being able to bring what you as the players have described previously to me, but maybe you have forgotten, or even if you didn't forget, just bringing it forth in the right moment, or a climatic moment here, and being able to pursue that. So I would say props goes to Mickey for that whole sequence and her whole character transformation there.
And I think props to both of you for kind of going beyond as far as flavoring this relationship. Because strictly speaking, as far as mechanics go, a warlock doesn't have to have a cool relationship with their patron, and doesn't have to interact with them, doesn't need to have a physical mark of their connection with their patron. Mm-hmm. But it's that stuff that makes the warlock most compelling to me, is when you go beyond just the mechanics and say, yes, your patron does speak to you, and yes, you do bear physical marks of your connection with this strange creature. Mm-hmm. And especially for a podcast where other people are listening to it and getting that extra description, I think it's a great extra kick to the story.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I would have to give props to Mickey for her entire backstory that she got to help describe her relationship with her patron. I think you've shared that in your previous Meet and Geek episode there, so go listen to that episode if you wanted to hear more about that. But also just like other actual play podcasts where they have warlocks. Biggest one in particular is Critical Role, with Travis Willingham, his character Ford, when he was a warlock, and their relationship, and just the constant battle, and the visualization that he had to satisfy or to keep growing in power with his patron as well. Because you're right, the warlock doesn't have to be, it can kind of be very boring if you treat it that way, to where it's like, oh yeah, I've got this magic and it just comes from a person I shook hands with in a pub, you know, like, but I feel like it's more satisfying with how Mickey has approached it, to truly delve in and truly be like, nope, our lives are intertwined. And how those lives are intertwined, it'll be interesting to see how that comes out in the podcast. We're running short on time here, but let's talk about Mondath herself. I think I can say with confidence that none of you expected her to go through some sort of physical draconic transformation, right?
I totally called it. I can
never pull the fleece over your eyes.
Hey, me and those gem dragons were just sitting there, and we. What if Mondath?
My true neutral status here. Yeah, that was a pretty intense battle, and it is not lost on anybody who listens to the episode how excited I was to be a dungeon master during that battle. It was just exhilarating from my end as well, and it seemed like it was from all of your perspectives as well. But what was the biggest surprise other than the transformation in that battle itself?
For me, I think it was, I'm very mechanically minded and really love getting a peek behind the screen, but you told us afterward that you completely homebrewed that stat block for Mondath, right?
I did. That didn't make into the episode, but Mondath, she has a stat block, but when it came to the draconic transformation, that was all homebrewed to help bump up the difficulty level for each of you, and to help describe a little bit more of the flavor of how I want Tyranny of Dragons to go, and how I think would be more satisfying. So Yeah, that was my first big dipping my big toe into the lake of homebrew there, so to speak. Never having homebrewed a world or done like stats or NPC stats to that degree, and so it was quite exciting to see how all of you stacked up against it and how it all shook out there.
Yeah, there's a giddiness for me involved with knowing that something you're experiencing in a game is just for that game, and that it's never been done before, probably will never be done again. It's a special moment.
Yeah. To go along with that, when I said that she had some legendary actions, what were some of your thoughts?
Oh boy.
I was waiting for the layer actions to show up next.
Not quite lair actions, not quite. You were only fourth level at the time, so.
Hey,
yeah, man,
we could take on anything, baby.
I guess if there's a way that, if I might take a moment to insert a bit of Crunch Squad into this word of recall, there's a progression of...
Sorry, go ahead.
There's a progression of how monster stat blocks get bigger and badder, because there's only so much you can do as far as, okay, it has higher armor class, it has more hit points, it can cast more spells, blah, blah, blah. And eventually you start to run to things like legendary actions. It can act outside of its own turn. You've got legendary resistances. It can just succeed on saving throws whenever it wants, as long as it has those left. And so seeing these bigger abilities start to creep in, and like Jake said, eventually we get into lair actions and whatnot, that's just a sign of things are getting real. Things are getting bigger in a really, like, concrete and numeric way. So for me, getting to see that we were finally fighting against an enemy that had legendary actions and legendary resistances, it was kind of like, we're getting there. This is big stuff.
Yeah, you're not just fighting goblins in a forest anymore or kobolds amongst the streets. Like this is the big cheese here. This is a mini boss, so to speak, or the actual boss at the end of the dungeon. And it was very fun. A lot of the motivation to creating Mondath and all of her like stat blocks was to understand was to take a look at all of the other battles that we had in this campaign and me just being like, gosh, they are just wrecking me. They just literally destroyed a room of kobolds, and only one of them went unconscious. And that's because they had like 2 hit points to start the battle with. They're just destroying me. And so just being like, well, what if there's only one person in this room, but what if they were like 3 people? And what if they could attack like 3 times? That might, maybe I'll have a chance. And it was kind of cool to see how those legendary actions, in an appropriate thematic way, do ramp up the battle and make it more tense without just throwing 12 guys onto a board. And maybe this is another Crunch Squad segment right here, is how to create your own interesting encounters. But this was a fun foray for me, and I appreciate you all being my guinea pigs with this. But I re-listened to the episode today, and I have to say that I in our group chat, I messaged everybody and said I'm a bit of a baby, but I sobbed a couple times while listening to the episode, and it could have been I'm a little fatigued just in life right now, but it could also have been just how immensely proud I was of all of you and just what you contribute to the episodes. And I mean, huge shout out to Mickey and her sound editing skills. I mean, they add so much. But one of the moments that caught me that I had forgotten about till I re-listened to was at the very end when Lance got that natural 20, and how that
from
natural
an inspiration die.
From the inspiration die.
Inspiration die.
And then that natural 20 turned into something deeper and something a little bit more intense, with Mondath being held back. And I just started weeping when I started listening to that. And just with the things that we haven't quite explored yet, I don't believe, but understanding. And Jacob, how did you feel in that moment, getting the natural 20, riding this high, and then to have that entire moment come over you?
Oh boy. Well, getting the natural 20 was just like, poetic justice in the end. Like, just not just like, just so perfect cap to it all, if it can. And it would have been, it didn't have to come from Lance necessarily. If any of us would have had a killing blow with that, it would have been like, yes, beautiful. And there will be a lot more beautiful moments coming too, we'll find throughout the campaign. Yes, it was very like, this just feels so right. And then when you were describing the kill and bringing up kind of a ghostly figure helping Lance, which you have done before, but this was very much a real visual more than just a voice or a whisper or a brush. It definitely, as a player, I was just like, oh dang, we're going here now. Okay. We're gonna do this now. Okay. And then for Lance, people will find out in the next episode. It's gonna have some major ramifications just for his emotional psyche. It brings up a lot of the past. Obviously, it connects to the backstory, but it's one, like, I already was like thinking when Lance went down in the fight, because Lance goes down, and Fleeple's, luckily his healing spirit was there to rev him back up, though. But it's definitely not Lance's first experience with being close to death, and so it was already like, this is gonna have some ramifications afterwards. But then to see that as well, it's going to bring some things up, because Lance doesn't necessarily know what's going on. He doesn't understand. He knows what he's seeing, but he doesn't understand why. And it's really, you're going to see it freak him out a lot. But that's not a negative. It was beautiful because it creates such a character shift for Lance in terms of just how he's progressing and what he's going to end up having to deal with a little bit more.
So for more emotional trauma, join us next week on I Cast Fireball's story episode to see the ramifications from Lance, from Fleeple, and from Malamara. I mean, I feel like we all have some sort of emotional trauma that we have to immediately deal with as soon as this battle is over with. So there's more to come for sure. I mean, you're literally not out of the cave yet. You're not out of the woods yet.
And another thing I'm excited to see moving forward, we made the connection earlier about the juxtaposition between Fleeple's deity and Mal's patron, but we're not the only two who have somebody on the other side of our powers. I'm just now realizing.
That's very true.
All fun stuff that we're going to have to find out in future episodes. And everybody, thank you so much for joining. All my players, Mickey, Jacob, Ned, thanks for joining for this. And all of you listeners, thank you for joining us on this bonus episode of I Cast Fireball. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening and discovering a little bit more about what was going on between our characters as we enjoyed interacting and actually living these moments. If you like what you're hearing and you like what we're doing, please leave us a 5-star review on your podcast service of choice. It really helps us out. It lets us know that you like this content and encourages us to keep going, encourages us to keep our story moving forward. Not only that, it helps get us into other people's recommended feeds, which I want to pause right there and give all of you listeners a huge shout out. As of right now, we are on track to hit over 1,000 downloads for the month of January alone, which would be the biggest amount of downloads we've had in a single month ever. And it's clearly because of you, all of you, getting the word out there and getting this podcast and setting it on fire. If you or any of your friends want to reach out to us in something longer than a review, shoot us an email at icastfireball2020@gmail.com. Shoot us what you're doing, what campaigns you're running as well, what campaigns you might want to see us run, or maybe random one-shots you'd like us to see us do. Maybe
Battle
different
Royale.
tabletop system. I mean, there's always the Battle Royale we can harken back to, but do you want to see us do any other tabletop systems? You can either have the hashtag ICastFireball or shoot us an email. We just would love to hear from you, see any character art you've got out there, and just really wanting to shout those people out who are supporting us so much. Speaking of supporting people that we love so much, we're giving a shout out to our sister podcast, Improv Tabletop, where Ned here takes the turn as the game master, both using the Fate Accelerated and the Avatar Legends tabletop system. Both of these tabletop systems being vastly different, but both with an emphasis on improv and intense role-playing. If you're a fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender, which I really, really hope you are because it is a phenomenal show, you will love diving into their ongoing campaign they have over there. And if you're a fan of just exploring wacky mashup worlds with improv being the big focus, you'll love their Fate Accelerated system they've got over there as well. So give them a shout out and a 5-star review as well. Let them know that you like what they're doing. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with all of your friends and fellow wacky adventurers. But until next time, I'm Thomas, your Dungeon Master, and around the table we've got...
I'm Mickey, and I play Malamara.
Jacob, and I play Lance Thalen.
And Ned, and I play Fleeple.
Let's keep that fire going, and we'll see you all next time.